Hello and welcome to the Clean Bill of Wealth podcast for Canadian doctors. I am your host, Galen Nuttall. Join me as I interview doctors and related professionals and talk about what it takes to achieve wealth in this, the Great White North. Not just wealth as measured by a bank account, but also family, faith, and health. Be sure to go to galenhelpsdocs.com. That is Galen, that is how my name is spelled, helpsdocs.com, to get access to my free video series where I uncover the top myths about growing your wealth as a doctor, north of the wall. Now, please enjoy the show. Welcome to a Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I am your host, Galen Nuttall, and tonight I am here with Rae Woodhouse. Rae is a third-year medical student at Queen's University. She is also the 2021 class co-president, and she is currently at Queen's University. So welcome, Rae.
Hi, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for being on the podcast.
No problem.
So what I'm interested in knowing about is, so we met a bit ago, we had a conversation, and then you agreed to be on the podcast. And one of the things I mentioned to you was that I know quite a bit about I feel like I know a lot about what it's like to, once someone's a doctor, like a practicing physician, because my dad's a physician, I grew up with that. And I know a bit about residency because I have some clients who are residents, but I don't know a ton about med school. So I felt like when we met, you gave me a lot of insight into the reality of what it's like to be in med school. And what I was hoping to hear, so first off, just a bit more about you. I'd be very interested in knowing, for me, becoming a doctor seems like a very long and journey. And I feel like it takes a certain level of passion or dedication. So first off, Rae, I'd be interested in knowing, why did you decide to become a doctor?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And for me, it wasn't always super obvious. I think there's a lot of people growing up who know that they always want to pursue that field. And for me, it really wasn't that case. I started university in biochemistry, and I loved science and I loved learning. And then when I really started to think about, okay, where do I want to go from here? Medicine just kept coming back as a career that seemed to encompass everything that I was passionate about and I could see a future for myself in. So the idea of combining like education, science, caring for people, constantly learning, it really just seemed like the perfect career. And so that's why I ended up picking it.
Very cool. So it seems like it encompassed a lot of your passions around learning, people, science. Like, is that fair?
Oh, definitely. It provided me with all the different opportunities, and it was so multi-focused that I thought it would be really interesting in, and something you could never get bored of.
Got it. Yeah, for sure. And you said that it wasn't always apparent, like that wasn't always, like you kind of came to the conclusion that this would make sense. I'm just curious, do you happen to come from like a family of physicians? Like, 'cause I know a lot of people, it's like, oh, dad's a doctor, mom's a doctor, or like it just seemed like the thing to do. Or is it more of very much of a discovery for you?
I definitely do not come from a family of physicians. Some of my aunts are nurses, but my parents did not work in healthcare whatsoever. And I actually was thinking about this the other day, and I think I only knew one doctor growing up, and that was my family doctor. So it definitely was not something I had a lot of exposure to, and perhaps that's not why it was super evident to me beforehand. And so it was when I got to university and I started talking to my classmates who were interested in medicine that it really became something that became interesting to me as well.
Very cool. And I think it's, I was planning on being a doctor for a while. I was going to drop out of my liberal arts school. I did a summer semester at Johns Hopkins. I was doing some pre-med credits. And for me, it's kind of funny because my dad is a doctor, and I don't think he actively told me not to become a doctor, but I kind of had this sense of like, Galen, you really got to want this to do it. And so I am fascinated when people end up making that decision. But also the doctors I meet, it's like there's such a variety there that I feel like I could probably meet one, like if younger, I could have met one and said, oh, I really want to do that. And I might have met another one and said, whoa, I really don't want to do that. But it probably depends on, for me, it depends on the setting I've met them in. It's also like I did some internships in the States. It's a different environment down there. But I think it's pretty cool that you went through that discovery and like you were talking to your classmates, and that's what made you kind of come to this conclusion. And so as a medical school student, you're in your third year, mm-hmm. and, is there anything around general advice? Like I know we're going to talk a little bit about financial, a little bit more specifically, but, I feel like right before I hit record, you were telling me about the next couple of weeks of your life, and it seems like you're traveling and going all over the place, doing all these different things. And like you said, it seems to me like one of the things you like about it is you can't get bored, or it's hard to get bored.
Yeah.
What do you have anything that's helped you kind of get through it, or any advice you'd have for someone starting out of handling what I consider to be a pretty rigorous, workload and course load?
Definitely. I think someone gave me this advice when I first started, and it's just become more and more apparent that it is true, is that the year you're in currently is the most time you're ever going to have. So enjoy it. And so in first year, you have a ton of free time. I'm doing air quotes right now. There's not a lot of free time. But by second year, you have even less. Third year's less, fourth year's less. So if you're just starting off, like, really enjoy the downtime that you have. Don't feel like you need to cram it with studying or too many extracurriculars. Like, just enjoy the time, because, yeah, as you said, it gets busier and busier. But at the same time, I would also say fill your time with things that aren't necessarily medicine. If you felt like you were a well-rounded person beforehand, don't lose that part of yourself. Continue to do the things that you love to do, even if it's just less frequent. And then the ultimate thing, the thing that gets me through it all is my friends and the group of people that I met in first year, and who I continue to be close with, but also the classmates that I maybe wasn't as close with, but who I see in the hospital. We're consulting each other, and it's just so exciting to see your classmates thriving and being great at what they do, or having a really bad day and you can just vent about it together. And so I think it's the camaraderie within your class that has really helped me manage clerkship.
Very cool. And I like that you said, fill your time when you do have that free time, and you said air quotes, like free time, like quote unquote, do it with the things that you did before, like don't discard those hobbies or likes or side projects. And I definitely see that. Like, I follow a lot of Instagram accounts for different like societies of physicians, or different people who consult with physicians, and there seems to be a lot of that of certainly when people are applying for different tests and taking different exams, like they talk about how stressful it is, but also how, like, it seems to me like there's a fairly big concern, or fairly big body of dialogue around how to manage the stress and how to stay grounded. And I think that's a good thing. Like, a long time ago, when I was considering becoming a physician, and I did an internship at a hospital in New York City called Bellevue, and I remember it was almost like a badge of honor for some of the doctors how much, or residents, how much time they spent there and how little free time they had, or how they didn't see, I wouldn't say badge of honor, but it felt that way for me, like, oh yeah, I never see my kids, or I never do this, and I was just like, oh my god, like, I can't do that. But I didn't realize that not everyone was like that. Like, not everyone lives like that. And one thing I didn't mention that I was going to talk about, but it's popping up in my head, is around that. You mentioned that your classmates, so that camaraderie helping you stay grounded. Is there anything else around sort of staying? I don't know if grounded is the right word, but like kind of keeping your identity and like not losing yourself in what's happening. I feel like that could happen in that sort of a situation of so much going on.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I have great advice for that, because I think I'm still also figuring it out for myself.
Right.
But I think part of it for me has been accepting just that some weeks I'm not going to feel like myself, and some weeks are really going to suck. Yeah. But then trying to like plan something exciting for the end of a really busy week, or finding little ways to kind of reward myself throughout the week when you've just been working like crazy or been having a terrible day. Just knowing that it's temporary, I think is what helps me. And maybe that's not great advice, but what works for me.
No, that makes sense. Like, yeah, go ahead.
I think just accepting that, like, you're not always going to feel great. But that's temporary, and life will go on, and will hopefully get better. But you can make yourself feel a little bit better by surrounding yourself with good people and trying to know who you can lean on, and what makes you feel good, even if it's just a cup of tea at the end of the day, something positive from every day.
Got it. Very good. Yeah, kind of a this too shall pass sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And then you did mention before we hit record that you do enjoy reading fiction. Is there anything you've been reading recently that's really awesome that has resonated with you?
Well, over the Christmas, I managed to do quite a bit of reading, but I read this one book called The Nightingale, which is about these two sisters in France during the Nazi occupation in World War II. And I thought that was really cool, because it was about a lot of female empowerment and such. But I'm actually currently reading Michelle Obama's book, so I guess that's not fiction, but it's not academic. So I'm really enjoying that. And also another really female driven story. So all good things.
What's it called? Jordan's story?
No, Michelle Obama's.
Oh, sorry. Got it. I thought I heard something else. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, her book, pretty sure my wife read it not too long ago, Michelle Obama's book.
Yeah, it's Becoming, I think it's called.
Becoming, there we go. Yeah. Very cool. And yeah, for sure. I mean, I find it's kind of funny. Like, I like to read. I love to read, but I typically read things like, I feel like I'm almost like cheating when I'm reading something that isn't going to directly help me in my business or my profession. But the other day I found an old book that was sitting in, like, I have this old box of books I read when I was a kid, and I found one that's been kicking around my house for a very long time. And it was one that I read over and over when I was a kid. And it's like a short fiction book. And I finally was like, I'm going to read this. And it felt really good to sort of like let myself like take a mental break from what I'm doing and not feel like guilty about not reading some sort of a, financial literature thing.
Definitely. And that's actually something that I started doing this about 1.5 years ago, and I've done it every night since, is that I read every night.
Oh, wow.
Non-academic, and often it is half a page because that's all I can manage before I pass out. But I just think it's such a great way for me to end my day. And I used to just watch Netflix before bed, so I suppose it's the same. I'm getting the same amount of sleep, just being more productive. But I've been able to read so much more, and I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it adds up. Like,
yeah.
If you just, a couple of years ago, I decided to read 20 minutes a day, and I was amazed at how many books I ripped through in just 20 minutes a day. It was really mind-boggling. I also did a lot of audiobooks too, which helped me while I was doing other things, but cool. Yeah. And then the other thing is, so when we met, you talked a little bit about some in the realm of financial advice, and some as a student, you've got people coming to you and giving you advice around finances, and you said something very interesting to me around certain advice that you felt was a little bit out of sync with your reality or a little bit difficult to manage. Or that it wasn't super helpful, and could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think what I was kind of talking about is we've gotten some financial talks where ultimately I walked away and the message really just seemed to be careful what you spend your money on, because a $5 coffee today costs $50 at the end of your 4 years. And I remember walking away from talks like that just feeling like that was so patronizing and not in touch with our current reality, because, well, one, I'm smart enough to know that interest accumulates and I understand how that works, but the reality is we spend so much money that's not optional. Our tuition is like $27,000 a year. We spend hundreds of dollars every 2 weeks to apply to electives, and then you have to fly to those electives, pay for accommodations while you're there.
Wow.
Let alone, then when you try to interview for residency programs, it's the same thing. So there's so much money being spent that's out of our control that my $5 coffee one day, the only thing getting me through a 15-hour shift, that is not what you need to be talking to me about in terms of my financial well-being. And that, I think, just compounds so much stress.
Yeah.
There's so much things to stress about already that your finances really don't need to be one.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, spend responsibly, but sometimes you just need a Starbucks, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good point, because that is one thing that boggles my mind is, like I said, I have clients who are in residency, and I have a client in particular that I'm thinking about who's just a master budgeter. Like, she has everything budgeted, like more than any client I've ever had. And I'm always amazed at it. And, I got in touch with her a bit ago, and she's like, oh yeah, Galen, this year's an expensive year. I had to pay, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was like $4,000 for
her LMCC part 2.
That sounds about right. What it is. And I was floored. I was like, I was just like, goodness gracious, like a $4,000 check, while you're a resident. And I know that's just like you're saying, like the yearly tuition is in med school, like that's a drop in the bucket in a certain respect. But like, just like, yeah, you know what? I budgeted really well, but yeah, there's this exam coming up this year. Things are going to be tight. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then, and I also have met doctors who are going to specialize, and sometimes there's a little bit of stress around, oh, this specialty is a little bit harder to find work in. And I'm like, and sometimes it changes while they're in school. Like, oh, people are shifting away from this one thing because it doesn't seem like there's going to be as many in the future. And I'm like, wow, that's got to be tough too, to sort of manage as you're studying. And I mean, last thing I'd say is, like you were saying, that you've already got all these stressors, you've got all these finances that are out of your control that are very massive, such that and you said, like, we understand that interest compounds. Like, yeah, in a perfect world, I'd take that $5, invest it or save it or whatever and not owe any money, but it's hard. And it's a big thing that I end up talking to my clients about, is the whole debt versus investing, or paying off debt versus saving. Like, it's a tough thing to talk about, and partially because it's a very emotional thing to have debt for so long, even though there is like this light at the end of the tunnel where you're going to be able to pay it off. But it doesn't make it, I feel, it doesn't make it all that much easier to just be sitting on. And like, I don't know, I kind of like your mantra of like, it's not always going to be like this.
Yeah. No, what I find interesting is you were saying you're shocked by some of the expenses that medical students and residents have to incur. But I think what surprises me is how shocked some of the older physicians are, because things have really changed since they were in school. Tuition has like quadrupled in the last 20 years. I don't know that for sure, but something along those lines in terms of numbers. And then there's all these added expenses that they didn't have to deal with. So I think what I find interesting is when there's such a disconnect between the people who are preceptors and who are the administration of the university or of our school of medicine, who have no idea that we spend this money. And so that's what I find really interesting, is that they are shocked.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because it's been so long, things have changed, and it's not like they're in the thick of it writing these checks or seeing people write these checks. And yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was getting ready for a talk a bit ago, and I messaged a friend of mine who's in med school, and I said, "Hey, can you just give me an idea of what your line of credit looks like?" Thinking she's going to have to look things up, and she texted me back within minutes with like, "It's this much. It's this much." Like, she knew the numbers down to like everything, like the percentages and everything.
Yeah.
And when we met, you talked a little bit about this, and you were saying that when you're in school, you feel like what you've noticed is there's people coming from different levels of financial savvy, kind of based on either what their parents have taught them or what they've kind of learned along the way. And it usually is parents, because schools don't really teach a lot of this. And you did say something interesting around that, of like kind of being aware of these differences.
Yeah. So I think coming into medical school, it's like you come in either with money, you're in the plus, you're neutral, or you're negative in terms of finances. And so that's like one area that coming in, people already at different financial levels. And so that's going to influence their perception of finances. And then also, depending on what your parents did or what their financial realities were, you may or may not have been exposed to the concept of investing money. In my family, my parents always said, "You're going to have to be smarter about money than we were, because we never had any money to invest." So I feel like I'm kind of navigating this financial world somewhat independently, obviously with their support, but they're not able to give me any advice or guidance. Whereas I have many classmates whose parents are accountants or ran their own businesses. And so they can just impart that wisdom kind of naturally, or my classmates grew up being exposed to those realities when not all of us were quite as privileged. And so I think for those of us who didn't necessarily have that informal education growing up, we have this kind of extra burden of trying to figure it out kind of by ourselves, or have it, knowing that we have to seek out the additional information.
Yeah, for sure. Because for some people, it might just be like a dinner conversation, like, "Oh, hey, today I got a student loan, or my loan went up, or my rate went up." And the parent might say, "Well, you can negotiate that, or you should go in and like, talk to them." And other parents might just say, "Well, okay, like, that's probably the way the way things are."
Exactly. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, at the end of the day, like you were saying, that even when parents are financially savvy, a lot of times they may not know. And I mean, this is a long ways away for a med school student, but what I really look at people with are like some of the major shifts in finances that occur during a doctor's life. So it's going from med school to residency. There's a shift there where a lot of my clients still aren't, it's still a very tough go, and they're not making a ton of money. And then the biggest shift being from resident to practicing physician, there's like this, I feel like there's this window of time where it's an opportunity to make some really smart choices around money, where people go from, their income goes up substantially, potentially in a very short period of time, and just understanding what it means and what to do properly with that. And then the next big thing is incorporating. Like at some point, a physician incorporates, and then there's a whole new series of issues. And what's fascinating for me is that there's very few places, like when I started working with doctors and I started figuring out how to advise doctors, there was very little out there as far as like concise, understandable literature or anything around that. Because most of what's being generated out there around financial advice or, newspapers and TVs, like they're not going to talk about such a narrow, specific group of people, because they have to talk to, the majority of the people that are watching. And so I find that it's usually stuck in places like that are like, I'll just give an example, TFSA versus RRSP. If I were to Google that right now, there'd be a million hits, a million articles. And for a doctor, that's not really all that important. Like it is kind of, but it's, most doctors ask me like, how should I pay myself? Because once they have a corporation, they're like, I am confused as to how I should pay myself, or how much should I keep in the corporation. So it's a whole different ballgame. And so if someone doesn't have parents who are doctors or have a business, they wouldn't really understand or know a lot about what it even means to have a corporation. So
yeah. And it's interesting because I originally was kind of thinking, these are things they should really be teaching us in medical school. But then as I thought about it more, and I was thinking, when are they going to teach us? You don't have any extra time. Like, what, are you going to remove hypertension from the curriculum so that you can talk about how to run a corporation? No. So I think the reality is that it's either part of your residency kind of exposure and you learn kind of by proxy, or you have to seek out the information for yourself, or you just live in ignorance, whichever path you pick. But yeah, I think it's challenging for us to learn it in medical school because of the reasons I previously mentioned, but then also because it's not applicable to you for another 6 years. So why would you bother retaining that information when it doesn't apply to you immediately? And so, yeah, I think there needs to be places for physicians to learn this information, because it's definitely not going to be during medical school.
Yeah, no, that's really funny because I gave a talk a bit ago, and I think I titled it, the 3 things they should have taught you, and I may have said medical school, like the 3 things they should have taught you about money in medical school but didn't, or something like that. And I think I should probably just change it to school or something like that, or the 3 things doctors wish they had known earlier, because that I can totally say what that is. Like when I meet doctors in their 50s and 60s, they're like, if only ...
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, it's funny though, because exactly like you said, like, what are you going to take out? Like, you're going to take out diabetes, you're going to take out hypertension. Like, what are we going to replace with financial literacy? And like you said, it doesn't apply for a long time. So it's like, even if you did, and at the end of the day, for a lot of doctors, I mean, you can learn so much. And I mean, the point of most knowledge for most doctors, I mean, is to have at least somewhat of a filter for what they're getting from, like, as far as advice goes, or what they're reading or learning. They're not likely going to say, I'm going to take this on full time to like really figure everything out. And even if they were to do that, they wouldn't be able to implement it all by themselves anyway. So I guess there's a sweet spot of knowing enough to know like what's good and proper, and enough to filter out the advice. And the other thing that I recently, I think it was a resident said to me, and they're like, you know what, money is like really taboo. It's taboo in general. But like what he was getting at was like, he just felt like he was really in the dark around finances as a resident transitioning to physician. He's like, I'm just so in the dark because my colleagues aren't really talking about it. And he had to very proactively ask people, he found the person that looked the most like he would look when he started practicing, like a very similar work balance and number of patients and all this stuff. And he's like, can you just tell me? He's like, I know this is a personal question, but can you just tell me what life looks like behind the curtain? Like, what are you making? What are you keeping? Like,
yeah,
can you actually pay off your debt? What's going on?
Yeah. And I think physicians are more and more willing to share their lives and their realities with their students. But I think finances is still something that is more taboo than other topics, perhaps. We talk a lot about like work-life balance and what it's like to raise children well in medicine, or balance academia and medicine, but the financial aspect of something is not something is chatted about frequently between attending and student.
No, no. And I mean, because like I had a client a month ago, and she said to me, she's like, Galen, I need to talk to you about, investing and stuff. And she said, how much of my, she's like, do you need to see my bank account to become a client? And I said, well, not necessarily. And she said, and it's funny because no one had ever said this to me before, but I think a lot of people felt this way. She said, I would rather walk around naked than let someone look at my bank account. And I just felt like, it's a bit of a shocking statement, but I think it just put into perspective for me as an advisor who I'm like, I mean, I feel like I'm a bit of a doctor in the sense that people come to me and they say things to me that they wouldn't say to anyone else around the things that they're worried about or the mistakes they've made and things like that. Mm-hmm. And, but the way that she put it, I was like, yeah, I think, and it just hit me like, oh, wow. Yeah. People, cause I'm just so used to it. It feels very commonplace to me. Like, yeah, tell me that you've got $200,000 of debt. Tell me that you haven't been paying it off or whatever, I'm like, I've seen it before. Like, it's nothing new.
Yeah. That's fair.
And yeah, so let's see what else. So yeah, and I guess we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
Anything else around? Yeah, I mean, you've given some really great advice, for younger students, or even for me, like to look for that positive thing at the end of the day and take that time to have that like reading or something to top off the day, and know that if you're going through a rough patch, it's not always going to be like this, that things will get better. I loved what you said about right now you have the most free time you'll have as a student of, it's going to like enjoy it, enjoy what you have while you have it, sort of thing. Awesome. Yeah. So thank you so much for being on my podcast.
No problem. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. This is your host, Galen Nuttall. Thank you for joining me at A Clean Bill of Wealth, the podcast for Canadian doctors. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to check out my free video series at GalenHelpsDocs.com, where I debunk some of the myths around wealth generation for Canadian doctors. Take care and talk to you soon.